I'm a procrastinator. So in this video, I have decided to only give myself 6 hours to complete building a Savanna Village. And thank you to B-Doggy, I totally yoinked this idea from him. Anyways, to avoid wasting too much time, I had made myself a to-do list. And it went something like find inspiration, build the structures, and make the village. So, the first thing I did was set a timer for 6 hours, then search for some inspiration. I came across some pictures of Native American tippies and some African houses on stilts and decided I was gonna blend these together in one village. Then I got started with building a huge tipi. My idea was that this tipi was gonna function as a community tipi for town meetings and religious events, so I would place it at the center of the village and scatter other tipis and huts around it. And I swear, I was struggling so much while making this tipi. I was basically building like there was no time limit, trying out patterns, changing colors, fiddling with every little thing, and honestly, it looked terrible. It looked like one of those cheap kid tippies you get for your 8th birthday. And just for reference, at this point, I had basically squandered an hour of my timer, and so I decided to ditch the weird patterns and just copy what they looked like on one of the reference pictures. And this turned out way better, so I made some scaled down versions in different colors, as well as a medium-sized tipi. At some point, I also found an info page about the Native American tippies, and apparently they are always turned towards the east, so I made sure to rotate all of them in the correct direction. Now I had spent around 2.5 hours on these tippies, and I decided it was time to make some of the more substantial buildings for the village, so I moved on to make some small huts. Normally, I would have built the different huts based on the professions they would house, but I'm not really sure what happened in my brain because I kind of forgot about professions until much later. Anyways, the hut took around 16 minutes to make, so I had obviously picked up my pace compared to the 90 minutes I spent on just the first tipi. For the next house, I tried a different style where I also incorporated some terracotta to widen the color scheme, and I also gave it 2 roof gardens. And somehow this got me thinking about wheat field, which spiraled me on to think about farmers, which reminded me, oh no, none of these villagers are gonna have professions. I checked the timer and there were about 2 hours and 40 minutes left, which was still plenty of time to make a few more huts. So for the next house, I decided it was gonna be a shepherd's house, but I ended up not liking this house very much, so let's just skip past it real quick. There, cute, but just way too big. The next house, on the other hand, turned out quite to my liking. I wanted it to be 2 small huts sharing 1 stair down, and I went with the block palette from the first hut and gave both halves a little roof garden. I wasn't 100% sure of what the 2 professions for this house should be, just that they should complement each other, like the butcher and leather worker or librarian and cleric. Spoiler alert, I end up going with the latter. Next up, Shepherd's House 2.0, and this time I went completely opposite of the last attempt. I made the hut as small as possible and as square as possible, and I even made it so the sheep could go in the sun. And it was just a better hut in every way. Then I wanted to make a house for the toolsmith, and I wanted to do something similar to a build I've previously made, where the smithing area is in a workshop on the side of the house, and while fiddling with the shapes, I got an unwanted visitor. This guy. He always shows up and manages to stand exactly where you're trying to build. Anyways, I managed to get the shape of the house how I wanted it, and I could start furnishing the inside. I realize now that the toolsmith uses the smithing table and not the blast furnace, but you get the idea. And then I slapped on a roof and was done. Now I was satisfied with the number of huts I had to work with, and there was also only 1 hour left on the timer, so I kinda just had to be satisfied. So then I spent some time making the buildings into world edit schematics so that they would be easier to paste when making the village. And when that was done, I had about half an hour left to put everything together. So I sped through everything, started pasting and making the most basic path brush to connect all the houses. Then I realized pretty quickly I had messed up some of the schematics, so I went back and fixed it, and honestly, I was pretty frantic. I did manage to make a separate sheep pen and get a bunch of villagers in, but I didn't really do much interior design. So most of these folk will have to sleep on the ground. So sorry, you guys. But anyways, my 6 hours were up, and I would say it turned out pretty decent. I'm even a bit surprised I didn't have to go into overtime. And I don't really know if the time limit helped me to not procrastinate. I mean, this video would have probably been out a few days ago if I hadn't procrastinated. But anyways, it was fun to see how much I could get done in 6 hours, and hopefully you also thought it was interesting to get a sense of how much time I spend on every little thing. Anyways, that was all I had for you today, and I'll see you in the next video.